Hey, welcome to the Bullpen Sessions podcast, a podcast for driven insurance professionals who are looking to reach their full potential in their insurance careers. This is the place where we help motivated insurance professionals build the right mindset and tools to create more credibility with their target prospects. I'm your host, Andy Neary, former professional athlete turned insurance advisor. Each week, you will learn tips and strategies to help you execute a clear prospecting game plan every single week. Clarity creates action. When you're clear, you're confident. When you're confident, you're consistent. When you're consistent, you are unstoppable. All right, let's dive into today's episode. Hey, welcome back to the Bullpen Sessions podcast. My name is Andy Neary, and this is episode 280. Today, I am joined by Madison Baker. Madison is a risk management consultant and VP with Marsh McLennan in the Dallas-Fort Worth market. I wanted to have Madison on to talk about how to build a personal brand in the insurance industry. And this episode is a masterclass on how to build a personal brand. What Madison has been able to do to establish awareness, trust, and credibility for who she is, not only with her target prospects, but within her own firm, Marsh McLennan, in the last 18 months has been unbelievable. And not only has building a personal brand changed her career, it has completely changed her confidence. It has helped her overcome the hurdles that many deal with impostor syndrome. And it's now giving her that credibility to walk in rooms with big opportunities and know she belongs. And so if you are an insurance producer tuning into today's episode and you want to learn how to build a personal brand, like I said, this is a masterclass. She is going to share 3 absolutely golden nuggets on how to build a personal brand in the insurance industry. So make sure to listen to the finish of this episode because this thing could change your career. All right, let's dive in. Welcome to Bullpen Sessions. How are you?
Thank you, Andy. I'm doing well. It's so fun to be back on here with you.
Yeah, you're actually, I thought about this. You were on the Broker's Voice.
Yes.
The show we had run a little bit last year, but now we're on the big enchilada here. We're on the Bullpen Sessions podcast. So
Look at me now. I made it.
You're going to bring a lot of insight to our audience. You know, our audience is made up of mostly insurance producers, young and old alike. And, you know, a couple of weeks ago, I had another young producer, Hayden Partain, on. And I think some of the young producers in this industry can bring some really good insights that anybody could glean value from. And because you grew up in a different time, meaning like things like social media were just part of what you grew up with.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited about this conversation. But before we dive into some of the insights I want you to share on social media and some of the things you're doing there, let's start here. You know, I know you, I've worked with you. You have talked about the fact you grew up with a father who was an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like growing up like that as a kid, having a father who had that entrepreneurial spirit?
You know, to me, it was normal because that was my world. So I really didn't, because my mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was an entrepreneur. You know, I thought that was the norm. So corporate America was not necessarily something that I saw myself being a part of. I just always thought, you know, I'll be a business owner and I want to be like my dad. He's my hero. And so to me, that path was already paved. And I thought that I was going to join that path. And in a way, I have, but it's just a different mechanism, right? My dad was working 24/7, but it didn't feel like work because he had fun and because he was building something that was a part of something that was much bigger than himself. And so when we sat down and looked at, one of my dad's requirements was that we went to college. And so it was never going to be, you know, turn 18, graduate high school, start your own business. It was, you're going to go to college, get an education, find your path. And whether that be corporate America or building your own business, I'm requiring you to go to school. And so I sat down with my dad and we went through all of the majors in the business school. And one of the majors was risk management. And my dad's business inherently was a risk management business. But what he didn't realize was that the risk management degree at Georgia was an insurance degree. And so it wasn't hedging commodities or interest rate risk or those really sexy financial mechanisms. It was insurance. And so once he found that out after my first week of school, he wanted me to change my major. But ultimately, what I learned, Andy, and I think a lot of people have experienced this, there were 30 people in my intro to insurance class, and there were 300 in my intro to finance class. And so the opportunity was in the insurance field. And I saw that on the first week and I was like, this is the path that I'm taking. So while my dad certainly wanted me to follow in his footsteps, I paved my own way and ended up doing something a little bit different.
Yeah, that's funny. Your dad thinks he's sending you into a degree where you're gonna learn the insides and outs of growing a business. Little did he know, no, she's gonna learn how to sell insurance. Now, remind me, did you grow up in Dallas Fort Worth? I know you live there now.
I did, yes.
Okay, you did.
Born and raised.
When you back growing up though with a father like that, I'm curious, are there, knowing what you do today, sell insurance, are there a couple things you took away from watching your dad grow his business that have impacted you in growing yours?
Absolutely. One of the things that comes to mind first is my dad was always a giver before being a taker. And so, what I mean by that is, while he was selling himself and selling his business, before he even asked for something in return, he was always giving something. And so, whether that be, a baseball memorabilia for a prospect of his that was a huge baseball fan, which you would resonate with, right? But he was always giving something, free advice, free consulting, an experience, whatever that may be. And from that, I learned that you can't go into a conversation with someone expecting to get something in return right off the bat. You can't expect the outcome to always be something that benefits you. You have to detach from that outcome. You have to give of your time, give of your resources, give of your knowledge. And ultimately, if you do that, the business will come eventually. So he helped me learn very early on that you can't be a taker when you're building your business. You have to be a giver. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to learn because I think as you're under the pressure chamber that is building a book of business and insurance, the desperation can get to you and that can cause you to hold your knowledge resident to yourself or be a little bit afraid to share resources or consultation or whatever it may be. And so flipping that switch in the dynamic of how I view business as a whole, he taught me to kind of flip it on its head.
Yeah, I like that because I think there's a lot of producers in the insurance industry who, honestly, to no fault to their own, it's how we've been taught, are going into every conversation with the prospect wanting something in return, right? Ultimately, the agent of record, their business, and there's always an ulterior motive. I think that's something it's why our industry often has a similar perception to, say, a used car salesman. No offense to the used car salesman out there, but it's people have this perception that we're always trying to sell them something. We're always trying to take something from them. And so I think having that lens, watching your dad grow his business is so important. And fast forward to today, we live in a more of a giving economy than we've ever have before.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for producers to understand you've got to give before you receive. And we're definitely going to talk about that when we get to your thoughts on social media and content and what you've done to build your brand. Now, I am curious. Okay, so you go off to the University of Georgia to get your degree in risk management. You notice there's 30 people in your class instead of 300 in the business school. First question, though, because I'm a college guy, college sports guy. How does a girl from DFW end up in Athens, Georgia? How did you choose the Georgia Bulldogs?
Yeah, it's a funny story. I went to a small Catholic school. At the time, it was one, I think, if not the smallest, one of the smallest in DFW. And so, as you may not know, the University of Texas is a school in which automatically accepts a certain percentage of kids based on class size. You have to be in the top at the time top 10% when I was in high school, but now I think it's top 6%. And I really wanted to go to the University of Texas, but I went to a very small school that didn't rank. And so my application was automatically going to go into a different pool to be assessed on whether I would be accepted or not. And at that time, my college counselor, he thought he had a certain degree of confidence that I would get in, but he just couldn't, he didn't want me to be without backup plans, of course. And so what we did is we looked at several schools throughout the country, and he recommended UGA to me because it felt a little bit like a mini Austin. And he knew that I loved music and I loved sports. And he thought that Athens would be the perfect place for me. And it's hilarious to think that UGA could ever be a backup plan for anyone because it's a very good academic school as well. But then I visited Georgia, and it was around right after Stafford's time there. And so a lot of people from Dallas were actually looking at UGA because of that. And I just fell in love with Athens. It was a college town feel, which was different than Austin, but it did still have, those key points that were really important to me. And ultimately, I did get into Texas and decided to go against my childhood dreams of going there, even though my dad tried to bribe me because he wanted to pay in-state tuition. I ended up choosing Georgia and never looked back. And I think what that did for me, though, was it allowed me to really step outside of my comfort zone. And even though I never thought I would be in sales, I started out in sales when I went to UGA because I didn't know anyone. I had to make new friends. I had to make new connections, and I had to create a whole new life for myself. And as an 18-year-old girl, that's a pretty tall feat. And so I think that was kind of my first sales job. And now here I am today, never thinking that I would be here. But so that's how I ended up at Georgia.
Well, there's so much to unpack there. Number one, you broke Matthew McConaughey's heart by deciding to go to Georgia, not Texas. Two, it's going to get really interesting for you now with Texas in the SEC conference.
I know.
So you're gonna be a hated fan
I
in
know.
Longhorn country. But three, I think what you just said is in very impactful. I wanted people to hear this. You came from a very small Catholic school, which hearing that you could argue, okay, you lived a sheltered life.
Yeah.
And now you find yourself in a new part of country, huge school compared to where you were in high school,
Mhm.
surrounded by people you don't know.
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, when you find yourself in that position, you have to sell yourself. A college student has to build their brand in a way.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I think when you said that, it reminded me when I moved out to Colorado, already 10, 12 years into my insurance career, but I found myself in a place nobody knew me. And it was scary, but exhilarating at the same time. And that's when I realized I'm selling myself. I got to build a brand. So that's
Yeah.
really cool that you recognize that at that age. Now, I do have a question. I'm curious because I'm impressed. While you were at Georgia, you spent 6 months going to school overseas at Oxford,
Yeah.
which, by the way, no small college there. We're talking pretty legit status. Talk to me about that journey, spending time overseas at Oxford. I think you were studying international business and international conflict.
Yes, that's
Yeah, what
correct.
was that all about? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I actually never thought that I would be accepted to that program. I applied on a whim. A lot of my friends were applying to different study abroad programs, but my dad only agreed to pay for a study abroad if I were accepted to Oxford. And so I, kind of again detached from the outcome because I thought that I would never get accepted because they only accepted the top 30 applicants from the business school. So it was a very competitive program. Ultimately, I did get accepted, and that program was specifically for those people that wanted to study international conflict and international business. And so we go over there, and Oxford is completely different than how universities and schools operate in the United States. So They don't give you weekly grades. You're not taking multiple choice tests. Everything was graded on how you interpreted and digested what you were taught. And so at the end of class of that semester, you wrote an essay. And it was a culmination of all of the things that you learned over the course of the program. And then you got one grade on that essay. And throughout the course of the program, you're having conversations in class with your professor and with your classmates, and they are grading you on those conversations. So, how you ask questions, how you digest the information, and the key points that you make in those discussions. And so, all the while, but it's not on any sort of test mechanism. It's just simply based on how you talk, how you write, and how you converse. And so that program really opened up my eyes to a different way of learning, but also a different way of applying what I learned. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, and actually made me a little bit sad for students in the US that don't get to learn in that method, because I think it challenges you in a way that the United States just simply doesn't challenge people or teach people in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. I think it's impressive. The key takeaway I heard from you just sharing that excerpt was, again, it was stepping outside your comfort zone and applying to a school like Oxford, not knowing if you ever had a chance to get accepted. And here you are, you get accepted and you find yourself studying abroad at one of the most elite universities in the world. And I think that, again, it's a testament to your ability to continue doing those hard things, stepping outside your comfort zone. And I'm not surprised. It's why you're as successful as you are today. When I look at your insurance career now, so you go to school for risk management. You're one of the few I know that did that, right? Most people do not go to college or do not get into the industry by design.
Yeah.
Unless you're a second generation, family owns an agency or something like that. But here you are, you're in the insurance industry now. You've been in it, was it 6, 7 years?
Yes, 7 years, going on 8. Yeah.
Okay. Still very young in your career. Talk to me about this. This is something a lot of young producers deal with, imposter syndrome. And we're going to get into your thoughts on building a brand and what brand means to a producer in the industry. But before we get there, we got to talk about some limiting beliefs producers can have. I know I had a lot of them. I think you've had them. And one of those is imposter syndrome. I think a lot of producers young in their career, because they see themselves competing with people who've been doing this 15, 20, sometimes 30 plus years. And it's easy to have imposter syndrome. Did imposter syndrome impact your career at the beginning?
Absolutely. I think imposter syndrome was one of the most crippling mindsets that were holding me back. And I don't believe that imposter syndrome is something that you necessarily overcome. I think that you learn how to fight imposter syndrome. I think you can learn methods and ways in which that you can battle it, the ways in which you can reframe your mindset. But I think it will always be there, because as you continue to excel in your career and have successes, but also have failures, there's always going to be that voice that tells you you don't deserve it, or that it was luck, or that it was good timing, or that that's not going to ever happen again. I constantly battle with imposter syndrome still to this day. But early on, Andy, it was absolutely crippling. I remember my first job in production, because I had been on the broker side prior to becoming a producer, but I was purely in the background, doing analytical work, client project work. I was not client facing. I was certainly not selling to CFOs or business owners. So when I was recruited to be in this producer role, I remember thinking, oh, wow, I duped this guy. Like, what did he see in me? Why is he hiring me? I must have been really good at interviewing. And I would tell myself that, on a weekly basis. And I remember he still to this day is one of my mentors. And I remember we sat down in his office and he said, Madison, do you think that I just hired you because I thought that, I needed to fill a butt in a seat and I had X amount of number of producers to hit. And I just thought, oh, we'll give it a shot. No, I am very calculated in the people that I hire. I look for certain qualities. I look for how they handle, questions and conversations. I'm looking for a person that I believe will excel in this role. And he was like, I see that in you, but you need to see it in yourself.
Mm,
Because if you don't see it in yourself, you are never going to make it.
I
And
love
that
that.
was really a turning point for me in learning the power of mindset, the power of how I talk to myself. And ultimately, once I realized that I really needed to actively work on fighting these negative thoughts, that's when I pushed through that critical inflection point. And it was like I was a brand new person. I started approaching my meetings with prospects differently. I started, walking to a room with a level of confidence that I had never had before. And that's when I started winning deals and selling business and gaining accolades and winning awards because it was a subtle mindset shift, but it was what I needed to overcome that blockage on being successful in the business.
Yeah, you brought back memories for me because I can remember when I was 22, 23, I was still selling financial planning before I got in the insurance industry. And I remember my first real case of imposter syndrome. It was an orphan policy. Back in the day, you got these orphan policies, people who hadn't heard from an agent or an advisor in a long time. And it was ended up being a doctor and who had a ton of money stacked that had grown in his life insurance policy, but his policy was outdated. It was time to transition it. And the amount of money blew me away. We're talking like mid high six figures of cash value. Hi, it's Andy Neary, and thank you for listening to the Bullpen Sessions podcast. Did you know the ideas shared on this show are things we actually specialize in helping you implement? If you're an insurance professional and you want to turn your credibility into consistent client acquisition, visit CompleteGameConsulting.com and schedule a free strategy call. Again, that's CompleteGameConsulting.com to request your free strategy call. All right, let's jump back into today's podcast episode. And I remember going out and meeting with him for the first time, and I took my sales manager, but here I am, 22 years old, and this guy is a 60-year-old successful doctor.
Mhm.
And I remember sitting at his kitchen table going like, why is this guy talking to me?
Mhm.
And that was my first moment of like, okay, I can't, if I'm going to feel like this in my sales career, there's no way I'm going to have success. Now, here is a perspective shift on imposter syndrome that changed everything for me. And I just heard this recently. You said something about growing in your career. If you're growing and constantly trying to improve yourself, you will always run into imposter
Yeah.
syndrome. Here's why. Imposter syndrome is nothing more than talking about something you haven't done yet.
Mm.
And there's always going to be a time you're talking about something you haven't done yet if you're growing.
Yeah.
There's always going to be that first time you sell a captive. There's always going to be that first time you sell a self-funded case. Whatever it is,
Mhm.
there's always going to be that first time, which means you are talking about something you've never done.
Yeah.
It's that ability to step into that discomfort and go, I'm going to do it anyways. And I
Yeah.
think for you, that big shift was walking into a meeting saying, why am I here? To
Mhm.
walking in that meeting with confidence that I belong here.
Yeah.
Prospects sense that.
100%.
And I think just observing, I've known you for about 2 years now, two and a
Yeah.
half. That
Yeah.
shift I see in you and see it on social media is night and day
Yeah.
compared to the woman I met 2.5 years ago.
I mean, the level of confidence that I have now, Andy, candidly, I never thought that I would ever reach this place in my career personally with how I felt about myself, about the value that I bring, because I was constantly downplaying the place that I've gotten to in my career. I'm like, how did I fool them? How did I, it was always explaining away my success. And it was always, oh, I'm going to bring this person on the meeting because I know that this CFO is going to sit across from, at the time, 25-year-old woman and think, what does she know about insurance? How is she going to manage this humongous line item on my balance sheet? And so I was doing myself a disservice by not allowing myself to think that I could thrive in those positions. And now that I am thriving in those positions, the success is breeding on the success, and my confidence is out of this world. But imposter syndrome, to your point, I love that. It's always going to be around. If you're not growing in your career, if you're not reaching new heights, if you're not challenging yourself, you're always going to feel imposter syndrome in those scenarios. So you kind of want to welcome it in a way. You kind of want to have imposter syndrome because that means that you're reaching new heights, you're growing, and you're learning new skill sets.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And the other thing I do want to commend you for, and I don't say this on the show, but when you realized you had that challenge, you immediately sought help. You and I did end up working together. Mm-hmm. And it was because you reached out to somebody saying, hey, I need a coach. I need help with something. And so I want to commend you on that, because I think not enough producers put the stock in investing in themselves to get better. That's a very important piece I don't want people to overlook. You are where you are at today because when you realized you had the challenge, you sought help.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk about brand. I mean, this is talk about a way to overcome imposter syndrome. Build a brand, because when you build a brand, you build name recognition, you build awareness for who you are, and it helps you start to walk into meetings with credibility. Mm-hmm. So talk to me. Let's start here. Knowing what you know today, doing what you do today, what are your thoughts on personal branding? Why is it important to have a personal brand today, no matter what you're selling?
Your brand is everything. Your brand, it is what people know about you and think about you before you walk into the room. People are making preconceived notions on who you are before they meet you. They're going to Google you. They're going to look you up on LinkedIn. If they're meeting you for the first time, if your brand does not speak to your credibility, to your knowledge, to your expertise, you are shooting yourself in the foot, because you have to overcome an objection that you don't know is already there, but you're walking into the room and they're questioning all of those things about you. So if you can overcome that on the front end by having a personal brand, it's one of the most powerful tools that you can have in your toolbox, and investing in it is not an option today. It is absolutely a requirement, because it is no secret that the decision makers in their roles, the way in which they make these decisions has changed. Their personalities are different. The way in which they invest in vendors and outside partners, what they're looking for has changed completely. They're not signing broker of record letters on the back of a napkin on the golf course. They want to know that they are partnering with someone that knows their business, understands their risks, and can help them solve. So having that personal brand and investing in that, building that constantly, is one of the most powerful business tools that I think anyone can do today. And honestly, this, Andy, I had no personal brand before I decided to start working with you. Or I guess I had a brand, but it really didn't stand for anything, and
you didn't have clarity. You didn't have clarity on it.
Yes, exactly. And so now, the brand that I have today versus the brand that I had a year and a half ago, it's not even comparable.
Yeah, I think you've done, it reminds me of a peer that lives in the DFW market as well and runs a very successful agency there, Seth Denson. Remember, he said this to me. He said, Andy, good agencies recognize that they're renting the brands of their producers. The producers are not renting their logo.
Yeah.
And I think if we can get more consulting firms, agencies to understand that your producers are brands today, because people are doing business with them, not necessarily your company.
Yeah.
The more I think there'd be flexibility to let producers grow a brand. And I think our perspective of what a brand is very jaded and skewed. It's not logos, fonts, not like social media influencers we think of. No, brand is reputation. How are you building trust and credibility before you walk in the door? It's called brand.
Yeah.
And what I want to do, and I want us to walk through, because I think this would be super helpful, is we might have some producers out listening in that are going, okay, I want to build a brand. How do I do it? I believe brand is built at the intersection of what makes you unique and what you do better than anybody else in the market. But let's talk about some of the things you've done, Madison, to grow your brand. Let's start here. Professional photos. I think one thing you've done a fantastic job is you invested the time and the money to go get some professional photos done that you often use in your posts on social media. Why is that important?
I mean, it's important for a couple of reasons, right? But first and foremost, it helps people know you before they know you. And so a great example of this is I recently spoke on a panel at our regional sales summit, and I purposefully wore the same suit that I'm wearing in my professional photos. And I did that to really test the theory of personal branding in person. And so before I got on stage, I can't tell you how many people came up to me and they were like, I know you. You're the girl in the pink suit on LinkedIn. These are people from across my region that I've never met. It's people that recognized my name and who I was, and knew who I was when I was walking into a room because they recognized me from those photos. And I even made a joke about that when I was on stage doing the panel. But it shows the power of the visual aspect of your brand. I think it's critical to help people understand who you are and who you stand for, but also see your face in those photos as well. So when you're sharing on LinkedIn, you don't want to just post an inspirational quote, the photo of the quote, and that be that it, right? You want to post a picture of you and your dog, post a picture of you and your family, help people know who you are and what you stand for. And when you meet them in person, it doesn't feel like you're meeting someone for the first time. So it's really, really important to have your face out there, to show people that you're investing in yourself with great professional photos, but also help them get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. This is where I get a lot of pushback. I have advisors who say, oh, I'm so sick of these people sharing personal stories on LinkedIn. That's not what it's for. Wrong. LinkedIn is more like Facebook today than it's ever been. And then you have people who are willing to share stories, but then they hide the stories behind these stock images.
Yeah.
That doesn't give people a chance to get to know you. And, something I learned from a mentor that is so important when building brand, it's we trust people we see, we trust people we know, and we trust people we learn from. We trust people we see is an important piece of that. That's why you have to post pictures of you. And we all have people we follow on social media that we trust. We've never met these people, but we trust them. And one of the reasons why is we see them all the time.
Exactly.
And that's why it's important that you have photos of you in your content. And if you're going to leverage this, go get professional shots done. It's worth the time and the money. Worst case, these dang iPhones and Androids cameras are amazing. Have your spouse or your loved one or somebody in your family take pictures of you.
Yeah.
It's important people see you. And I think one thing I want you to touch upon, because at the end of the day, the goal is to make money. You want to use this to grow your book of business. However, it's also built some brand recognition within Marsh McLennan. Like, talk about that just for a little bit, about where you've seen this brand building impact your career within Marsh.
It has been absolutely life-changing for me to have this brand, Andy. I have never in my career brought value to my company outside of my sales. My measurement of value has always been encapsulated in the revenue number that I've hit for that firm. And this brand that I've built now has given me value that I'm bringing to the company completely separate from the revenue that I'm bringing to the table. So I have been asked to speak on national panels, on regional panels. I've been asked to speak to our top producers about how to build a brand, the importance of content creation, marketing strategies. I would have never had these opportunities, Andy, if I did not take the time and effort and investing in building my personal brand. Um, it's pretty wild to think that it only took me about a year to garner this credibility and make this much of an impact on my company. And it's really unlocked inside of me a new passion. Sitting on that panel last week at our regional sales summit, I was energized speaking in front of that room more than I have been in a very, very long time. The fact that I can bring value to industry leaders that I've looked up to the past decade in this industry, the fact that the CEO of our entire company went as far as to reach out to our chief sales officer, suggesting that I speak to our national top producers. These things would have never happened if my value was solely only derived from the revenue that I was bringing to the company. So I really can't overstate how much it's done for me, both personally and professionally. And just to your point, where you always preach to us, it's not about who you know, it's about who knows you. The CEO of our entire company knows who I am, and I'm not sure if many of my peers can say that.
You said something. Number one, if you're listening to this, you're hearing Madison's computer notifications ding quite often. Tells you how busy she is. She's probably getting some emails from inbound leads because of this brand. But what you said is very important. It was the same epiphany I had when I started building my brand out in Colorado. When you put that work in, you become an invaluable resource to your organization. And your value is greater than the sale you make. And I think too many producers right now, their only value they bring to their agency is selling business because they're not doing anything else. They're not building any brand recognition. Brand helps you become an invaluable asset to any organization. It's like athletes. Athletes have brands. Why do they get paid millions? Yeah, they catch footballs, they hit home runs, but they put butts in seats. People want to come and see them. And that's the same thing when you build brand within the insurance industry. So here's where we're going to wrap up, Madison. We're going to share 3 tips on how to grow your brand, to grow your business. You ready? I'm going to guide you, and I want your insight. These are things I think that are important in building a brand. I would love your thoughts. Number 1, to build a brand, you have to understand or get clear on what makes you unique.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like for you? Being a younger professional insurance producer in the industry, female, especially in a male dominated industry, building a brand that looked unique. Was that important to you?
100%. I think that the age-old saying that insurance is male, pale, and stale very much rings true. And I knew that I could bring something so opposite to that, right? And I leaned into that. The skill set and the value that I bring to a client relationship looks completely different than what it looks like for the typical producer in our industry. And so I leaned into that. A lot of people think that is a disadvantage, but in reality, the people that are going to work with that person would never want to work with me anyways. So I want to work with more of the people that want to work with me and that want the experience that I'm going to bring to the table. So getting clear on that vision of who I am, what I bring to the table, and the ideal client, what that looks like for me, has been transformational in building this book. Because originally, when I built my first book of business in this industry, I wanted to work with anyone and everyone. I wanted to be everything to everyone. I would be a chameleon no matter what room I was in. I would try to be that person. I'm not a golfer, but I would pretend that I was a golfer and try to throw terms out that I thought would resonate with said buyer. And it's so painful to think about myself in that manner, because authenticity now is at the heart of who I am and how I do business. But I was the complete opposite of that. And I was always nervous that I was going to be losing clients. I was always nervous they were going to find me out because I wasn't being true to who I was. And I was trying too hard to be everything to all different types of people. And so now zeroing in on um, what is my person and who is that ideal client that I want to work with has been critical
Yeah,
this time
I love
around.
that because I think the first step in building a brand is to know, who are you? What does the authentic version of you look like, the real version of you? Because I think there's a lot of people in the industry who fake it till they make it, or they're trying to be somebody they're not to win business. Then it's recognizing who your ideal target is and knowing who you're for and who you're not. And
Yep.
what you said is very important because you can't be all things to all people. And so you have to understand, when you build a brand, some are going to love it, some are not. But the ones who are
Yep.
going to love it are going to be your ideal prospect if you're clear on who that is.
Yep.
How about this tip? Building a brand requires creating content. Talk to us about how important creating content on LinkedIn has been to your business.
It has been everything for my business because it's the mechanism that I've used to build the brand that I have today. And if you'll remember, Andy, when we first started working together, I felt really uncomfortable with content. So much so that I told you that I would never make videos on LinkedIn. I would never do podcasts. I would never do anything that had me, visually speaking in front of people. And now look at me, which is hilarious. Never say never. But I started out leaning into what I was comfortable with, and that was writing. So I've always been a writer. I've always enjoyed that as an outlet. And so I started with a newsletter. And that newsletter now today has 2,500 subscribers that are getting my newsletter every month. It's been such a powerful method for me to grow my brand and grow my network. But then, as I was seeing the success with the newsletter and writing the weekly posts and sharing the personal stories, I started getting more comfortable. So I started putting out video, and I started, speaking on podcasts and having, keynote speaking opportunities and sharing those. And it's just built on each other. And I think now more than ever, having multiple methods of content creation and sharing those consistently has made my brand so much bigger and better than it was when I was just doing the bare minimum of sharing, written stories every week. So content is absolutely everything. It's essential. You can't have a brand without it.
That's what you did so well. I think when you wanted to start creating content, you leaned into your gift. You liked writing. That's how I started on LinkedIn in 2014. And you built your Risky Business newsletter, which has grown to 2,500 subscribers, which is phenomenal. But it's building that brand. It's putting yourself out there. You're throwing the pictures up of you, which is not comfortable.
Yeah.
But it's how you establish trust and credibility. Now, my last tip I want to get your insight on building brand. This one's a little deeper. What are your thoughts on the importance of your brand, or call it maintaining your brand, deep into the sales process? So we started with, what's your brand? What makes you unique? Who are you for and who are you not for? How do you use that brand and content to generate awareness and interest? But now you're getting leads, you're meeting with people. What are the important steps to maintain your brand throughout the sales process?
So you and I worked on this a lot actually, and implementing your system and process that you taught me has become so integral to my brand that I don't deviate from that in the sales process. So things that I felt very uncomfortable with in the beginning, like suggesting to me to send out agendas ahead of meetings and always confirming meetings and using video follow ups after meetings, all of those things have become so ingrained in the brand that I've built that I have decided every time with each prospective client to never deviate from that. Because if I were to deviate from that, that's creating holes in my brand. And lack of consistency, as we know, is the killer of any brand. A way in which I can consistently show up each time, no matter who the prospect is, no matter what industry it is, no matter how far along the deal is, I stay authentic to who I am and the process that I've built. And the success comes from that because ultimately, if you are being authentic to who you are and you have built a brand that is true to what you bring to the table, the people that want to work with you will always work with you. And so you want to attract more people like that. And the way in which you do that is by being consistent with that brand, never deviating and never trying to mold yourself into a version of what you think that prospect wants to see.
I love that. I didn't know where we'd go with that last one, but I think what you said just nailed it on the head. If you are putting yourself out there consistently, I call it authentic consistency. You are going to walk into more sales opportunities with credibility. And just that alone is going to build confidence for you. And I think that's what's changed for you the most, is walking into these doors with more confidence is what makes it easier for you to continue displaying your authentic brand throughout that process. And displaying that authentic brand is what makes you look different. It keeps you in control of the sales process, and it just puts you in a better position to win.
100%.
So I think these 3 tips, Madison, are unbelievably invaluable. Number 1, when it comes to building a brand in the insurance industry, you got to know who you are. What is the real version of you? What is the authentic version of you? What makes you unique, and what do you do better than anybody else? And who are you for, and who are you not for? The second thing is you have to put that brand out in the form of content to build awareness so you can build trust and credibility. And then it is imperative when you open doors with the trust and the credibility that that brand stays consistent. I absolutely love that. So we're going to wrap it up with this question. You have done an absolutely phenomenal job with building your brand. The awareness people in this industry have of you now compared to 2.5 years ago is night and day. The awareness your own firm has of who you are is night and day. If you could go back, I know you've only been in the industry for 7 years, but if you could go back to your rookie year in the insurance industry, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give Madison 7 years ago?
Oh gosh, I love that question. It's a hard one. I would tell her to put herself in more rooms where she was uncomfortable. I would tell her not to shy away from speaking up at the tables where she felt uncomfortable speaking up in. And I would just encourage her to have confidence in the person that she is and what she brings to the table, because there is always going to be someone that can benefit from the story that she has to share. And I always say this, visibility is our responsibility. And so even if you don't think that your story or your struggle is going to benefit a large amount of people, what if it benefits one person? What if sharing your story can change the life of just one person? It is your duty to be visible. It is your duty to share that story, and it is your duty to make that impact.
Well, and I think putting yourself in the rooms where it's uncomfortable and speaking your mind is exactly what you're doing. You're on stage at Marsh McLennan sales symposiums, on stage in a panel, speaking your mind. I mean, I don't know if Madison 2.5 years ago would have been as comfortable doing that.
She would not have.
And so I hope everybody listening, and I hope if you're listening into this right now, this was a masterclass on how to build a personal brand in the insurance industry. And for an industry that still quite doesn't understand what that means, in my opinion, Madison, what you just shared, I hope gives so many people the inspiration to go out and put themselves out there, build that brand, because that's what prospects want to do business with. And if you're listening in, you know what happens. I mean, when you create clarity, you will be more confident. When you're more confident, you will be consistent. And when you're consistent, you will be unstoppable. And today, what Madison just gave you is going to help you be clear on what it means and how to build a personal brand. So do yourself a favor, go take action, put yourself out there, get in uncomfortable rooms. Madison, thank you.
Thank you.
And for everybody else, you know what happens next. When you're clear, you're confident. When you're confident, you're consistent. I almost said that wrong. And when you're consistent, you are unstoppable. Go get after it today.
Thanks, Andy.
That's all we got for today's episode of the Bullpen Sessions podcast. One thing that would really help us both and other new potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment in iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you tune in to listen to the show. Also, Make sure to link up with us at CompleteGameConsulting.com on social media. And please share this podcast with anyone who you think might enjoy it. Until next time, remember, clarity creates confidence. Confidence creates consistency. Consistency makes you unstoppable.